There's 3 words that strike fear into the hearts of men. There's a lump. Another 3 words are a Ubisoft original. The original in question is The Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown.
The introduction. Into the Mountain.
The headlines went that The Lost Crown killed its development team. After 3 years in October 2024, Ubisoft tore its development team apart, stating that they wanted to utilise the team's expertise on other projects. Yet reports suggest that the team dissolved due to lacklustre sales figures, even though the game is currently sitting at a Metacritic score of 86. So together let's work this one out with a video essay. An essay with a twist. That twist being, I don't actually know what I'm doing.
Part 1. A Daddy's First Impression. The
humble Metroidvania is my favourite video game genre, and with every entry you know what you're getting into. A mysterious world to explore, the slow progression of power, solving puzzles that have grown from those new power-ups. That moment when you finally get good. There's something so alluring about the games that fall into this category. One of my most recent memories was playing Metroid Dread late at night. I'd put my then 6-month-old to bed in the living room with me, and I'd go to town killing enemies in Metroid Dread. I'm also quite partial to a subpar Metroidvania, Shadow Complex for example. Developed by Chair Entertainment back in 2009, it's a game that was born of the Xbox arcade era. And you know what? It's still a bloody good game. That's not me popping on my rose-tinted glasses. I completed it again recently, and despite it being a little bit buggy, with one of the most basic and boring stories known to man, there's some real magic in it. And if you haven't played it yet, go and grab yourself a copy.
Part 2. The game begins.
Setting your initial expectations for any video game is key. With Steam refunds, gamers can get their money back if you play less than 2 hours. So now more than ever, it's important that a studio gets a player hooked instantly. And with the TikTok generation, attention spans are getting shorter. So it's crucial that the first half hour of the game hooks you and doesn't let you go until the end. With Metroidvanias, the first item a player finds is super important. It sets the tone of the game, gives you the first toy to play with, and gets you thinking, shit, this is going to be a great game. Super Metroid starts you off with a morph ball, where Samus rolls herself up into a small ball and allows her to squeeze through tiny spaces. It's the upgrade powered by self-fellatio. Hollow Knight's Mothwind Cloak allows players to dash, enabling them to cross gaps and dodge enemies. It's a crucial ability for traversing the game and engaging in combat, and you get it within the first hour or so of the game. In Shadow Complex, you get a flashlight. Alright, that's a bad example. With The Lost Crown, however, you're expecting big things, right? Wrong. The first power-up you get is a scarf. It's a bloody scarf. Now, apart from some sort of royal decree nonsense, the scarf, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't even look that cool. Also, what does it do, you ask? Well, nothing. It's not a great start for The Lost Crown, and I can imagine this is where quite a few gamers gave up on the game. There's another point later on where I almost tossed my controller out of an open window, and I'm guessing I wasn't the only one. Moving on to my next pet hate, trying to sell DLC to a game I haven't even played yet. Hello, Ubisoft! How are you going to convince me to spend even more money before I started playing? Spoiler, I haven't bought the DLC or played it. But to plaster your huge DLC poster all over the start screen rubs me up the wrong way, and this daddy does not like being rubbed.
Part 3. Pushing all the buttons.
So, here we go. The hardest part of any video game, paying for the thing. But one click and that's done. That's 17 quid 49 I'll never get back. Let's take this time not only to mourn the money spent, but also consider what else that kind of money could do. During a Steam sale, I could have bought at least 2 3/4 of Hollow Knight, or enough petrol to drive halfway to Glasgow. So let's see how our choice pans out as we dive into what makes this game special, or special needs.
My name's Jeffy.
Let's start with my eyes, not their deep, beautiful blue colour like a vast sea on a summer morning, but what they've seen. And it's not long till you're greeted by The Lost Crown's beautiful cutscene. Animated stills serve to match the game's tone perfectly, not to mention the sound design that complements each slice and transition of the story. As you continue on, you seem to run in a straight line for quite a long time. This gives you the impression that the map is huge. Spoilers, it is. And at first glance, this seems like a positive. Yet your slow movement at the start and limited traversal options can make exploring this huge map feel like a bit of a chore. And not the good kind of chore like organising your wife's bras, it's the bad kind like cleaning up baby sick out of her favourite bras. Also, the lack of clarity about whether you can clear an obstacle or not. It's a little maddening. There's no colour coding, like the super missile in a Metroid game, but I do like how the ability to take little in-game screenshots, remembering where you got stuck, helping you return to investigate more later. Now, the next thing you come across are the whack-whack trees. These are little spots of serenity. You rub up against a whack-whack tree, fills your pots and restores your health. Plus, you can personalise Sargon's little Pandora's necklace. When I found my first whack-whack, I thought players would use it for fast travel. I was wrong, but also partly right. You'll see in a minute. As there's so many of them, it makes sense that these to be points that you could use. Instead, the game starts you off using Homer statues, and it's not until much later on that this becomes a special power you can unlock, for the princely sum of 300 time crystals. Also, while we're on the point of spending time crystals, could we not have come with a better name for these? Ubisoft might as well have called them Prince Points and finished with it. Next, onto the combat. Again, in the early game, killing the fodder enemies can feel like a terrible chore. The time to kill seems far too high. Fodder enemies are taking 20 plus seconds to kill, which in the early game can feel like you're trudging through treacle. Again, not in a good way. Combat in the Lost Crown is, well, it's bloody good. There's combos to be had while mixing in the game's block and parry mechanics. Feels rewarding, if you can actually pull them off, that is. But because there is so much depth to the combat, and you want to feel like you're getting the most out of the system, every so often it can feel like you're punching your way through custard. Very angry custard with swords. The early game fodder enemies are particularly guilty of this. They aren't memorable foes. They resemble that missing no from the Pokemon games, with delusions of grandeur. Instead of you throwing your balls at them, each encounter comes a drawn-out slap fight where you try to stun lock the bad guy so you can move on. Now, I died playing the Lost Crown. I died a lot. I died so much that the respawn screens start to feel like a little second home, but without the extra stamp duty. When it came to boss fights, for me, that's where the game displayed its true brilliance. Boss encounters are fast, intense, but bordering on unfair, where you spend most of the time dodging attacks. You learn patterns and squeeze out a win with your time-warping scarf. It's where the Lost Crown finally feels like it's got teeth. For a moment, you forget the scarf, the DLC that Ubisoft is trying to cram down your neck, and the respawn screen that lingers even when your eyes are closed. This video game magic washes over you, where you remember why you have this hobby in the first place. Then, bam, it's back to punching some custard.
Part 4. The cracks are showing.
Let's talk about the plot. Specifically, the time travel plot. Early on in your adventure, Sargon comes across a child who is blinking his way through time. Now on paper that sounds exciting. Everyone loves a time travel story. They often have a clever twist, overlapping timelines, paradoxes. Sometimes there's even a ridiculous hat involved. You know, all that good stuff. What we get instead is a confusing yet underwhelming tale, about as gripping as a blancmange. The story really starts to hint at something grand with a betrayal. Then there's the realisation of being stuck in time, realities folding in on themselves and cryptic visions of the future that you're supposed to give a shit about. But instead of pulling you in, it sort of washes over you. There's bags of potential here, but it's buried under so much exposition and characters you don't really care about and just endless jargon. The acting's pretty good though, so I'll give them that. The killer, however, is that a Prince of Persia plot is usually functional but engaging. This one, however, it wasn't. You know it's bad when you find yourself scrolling through Facebook mid-cutscene. Characters appear, say something cryptic, then evaporate, and you're left wondering if you missed something important or, fell asleep with your eyes open. Time travel mechanics can be a narrative goldmine. It worked well in the sands of time. Instead, the Lost Crown's plot is a used nappy that you found in a bin, which is actually filled with chocolate pudding. You just need to be brave enough to lick it. Recently, I found myself watching Josh Stripe-Hayes review Soul Reaver 2, fresh off its remaster and re-release. Now, Josh is my man when it comes to dissecting a video, and when referencing Soul Reaver 2 he said this.
This is the perfect visualization of how this game is an excellent story and a mediocre to, honestly in some parts, poor game.
Flip that around, you get the Lost Crown, because that's what the Lost Crown feels like. A game with, for the most part, rich and flowing gameplay that you can sink your teeth into, wrapped up in, at best, quite a boring story. Why is it that even after 40 years of video games, the story often seems to be the weakest part? If the Lost Crown had got the story right, I dare say that there might have been a sequel on the cards. Now a quick word on the immortals that you encounter throughout the Lost Crown.
You are a brave one, Sargon. I'll give you that. And bravery is what makes us immortals.
And I say immortals with air quotes, the kind are usually reserved for free massages or read the instructions. For a start, you have no idea why people call them the Immortals. Whether it's supposed to be some sort of tongue-in-cheek title, or they actually are impervious to death. Well, you soon found out the latter isn't the case. These purported godlike beings appear throughout the story, making grand claims, big armour, and even bigger opening monologues. You expect them to be untouchable forces of nature, grand boss fights that make your hands sweat even before you pick up the controller. But like the rest of the game's obstacles, they drop after some swearing, throwing your controller across the room and giving up while you search for help on YouTube. Now, if you played Metroid Dread, like me, you'd immediately get deja vu when you encounter the Lost Crown's jailer. In Metroid Dread, early on you get acquainted with the Emmys. Extra-planetary multiform mobile identifier for short. Giant, mostly unstoppable robot-like stalkers that chase you through corridors while you squeal and button mash in blind panic. Well, in the Lost Crown you have the jailer. When you first see the jailer, the fear sets in. Your mind is cast back to that night playing Dread in the dark with a 6-week-old baby in a Moses basket as you both shit yourselves for very different but purely coincidental reasons. In other words, Metroid Dread's Emmy encounters are a masterclass in pacing and pressure. They're also combined with a way in which Samus regains her upgrades throughout the game, so there's a level of risk and reward peppered through our mission, mixed in with each encounter changing, depending on the type of Emmy, keeping the game exciting from start to finish. The Lost Crown's jailer section, on the other hand, feels a bit crap in comparison. Once the initial scare wears off, you realise you're being funneled down a hallway with a small circle showing where the jailer can spot you. And when he inevitably catches you, Sargon gets teleported away to a prison area of the game. There's no game over with a spike to the face, more of a mild inconvenience than a speedrun ender. Still, points for effort. But don't expect me to soil my pants the second time around, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, or the sixth. Now, let's talk about one of the Lost Crown's most baffling design choices. Deep in the sewers, one of the most dangerous sections of the entire game, they had the genius idea to take your map away. That's right, Ubisoft Entertainment, in their infinite wisdom, looked at this massive, intricate, multi-layered Metroidvania map and thought, you know what the player needs right now? To be completely and utterly fucking lost. I sort of understand it. Get a player comfortable, build some tension, increase immersion, create some mystery, all noble design goals. But here's the problem. This happens far too early on in the game. I still need my hand holding. I'm still relying on the bloody map to log the blockades, track my position and see where I'm going next, and then it's gone. And not in a fun challenge sort of way. More like, so tiny 4-year-old learning to ride a bike, let's go find a massive hill to push you down. And forget the stabilisers. Instead of feeling tense, it comes across as a little bit terrifying. Nevertheless, it doesn't feel like solving a puzzle. More like you're wandering in circles, praying you haven't already passed the same cursed whack for the 400th time. Taking away the map at that point doesn't make the game more immersive. It makes me irritated, as every corner of the sewers look the same. I don't know about you, but when a game starts inspiring Google searches like Prince of Persia the Lost Crown, where the hell am I? Something's gone a little bit wrong. Also, reading the comments of some of these YouTube help videos, there are some very angry people, with quite a few gamers indicating that this is the point where they just gave up on the Lost Crown. Now, let's talk about one of the cardinal sins of Metroidvanias, bad backtracking, which sounds like a Netflix series, but ignore that. The Lost Crown commits this one with the grace of a drunken peacock. First, enemy respawns. I've never been a big fan of enemies who respawn indefinitely. They're a relic of the past and should stay that way. Yet, they're generally a large part of the genre, but hundreds of other Metroidvanias have managed to get the balance right. The Lost Crown, not so much. The reason Metroidvanias are like this is because it keeps areas feeling alive, giving you a chance to work on your ever-growing pool of moves, all the while farming whatever in-game currency that might be. But in the Lost Crown, the pacing of the enemy respawn, it feels off. Like someone cranked the respawn dial to unreasonable on a Friday afternoon, then they called it a day. You'll clear out an area, take 3 steps into the next one, realising you've gone the wrong way, you turn around and boom, everyone's back. The same enemies in the exact same spots, with the exact same smug expressions on their smug bloody faces, ready to chip away at your health bar and your will to live. The Lost Crown has a pseudo-Souls-like combat system. Mix that with a time to kill that is excessively high, it's less a test of your skills, and more of a tax on your ever-dwindling patience. And it saps the joy out of exploration. Backtracking should feel rewarding, embracing your inner badass while retracing your steps, breaking through old barriers with new powers. Instead, it feels like a job that you sort of hate, and at a certain point, I stopped exploring. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't face the same sentient, cold, unfeeling custard for the 1200th time.
Part 5. A light through the cracks.
Credit where credit's due. The Lost Crown may fumble in quite a few places. It often faceplants the pacing and makes a bollocks of the exploration system, but when it gets things right, It really gets them right. For starters, she is a looker. Case in point, that frozen ship in time. It's a part of the game that makes you sit up straight, pause for a moment and think, holy shite, this is what I signed up for. Visually, it's glorious. The atmosphere is thick with mystery, the icy palette giving you a haunted, ethereal quality. Like you've stumbled into a weird dream you once had. You know, that one where you were getting repeatedly stabbed by ghosts. There is this eerie stillness to it all, contrasted beautifully by tension bubbling underneath. The art direction here is working overtime, and the level design actually makes sense. Traversal is super satisfying, and the whole area oozes perfect video game vibes. It's one of the few moments in the game where the world design, combat, and storytelling all seem to be on the same page, shaking hands with a gentleman's agreement not to be crap. If the rest of the game had this level of cohesion and artistry, we'd be looking at a modern classic. Instead, we get glimpses, frozen, fleeting moments of what the Lost Crown could have been. Still in that brief moment, chef's kiss. More of that please, less of all that other shit. Now, here's the final kicker. After slogging through some rough traversal, combat that feels like a pub brawl at times, and a map that's bigger than the visual universe, something weird happens. About an hour from the end, the Lost Crown suddenly remembers it's a great game, and everything just clicks into place. Traversal finally starts to make sense. The movement system, which for the most part is like wading through an elderly hoarder's newspaper collection, where every article is mildly interesting. But once you have all the power-ups, you become a master of the Lost Crown, like you should have done 15 hours ago. Suddenly you're dashing, double jumping, chaining abilities together like a pro, and dare I say it, the game becomes a pleasure to play. Fast travel finally opens up in a meaningful way. Those whack-whack trees can finally be used for fast travel. Well, if you're willing to spend a few of those time crystals you now have a barrel of, removing the endless trudge of letting you actually explore this beautiful world the devs created. It's like the game has spent 10 hours tightening the screws on your bollocks.
Now the whole world's gonna know that you don't scratch your fucking balls.
Only to finally say, alright, here's the good stuff. Combat feels balanced, fights are less of a grind and more of a dance, timing, parries, special ability, it all flows. And more importantly, it feels like you have the upper hand at last. It's honestly frustrating because the late game of the Lost Crown is actually excellent. It makes me wonder if some games journalists actually managed to get this far and didn't just give up when the map was removed. If the pacing had been there from the start, we'd be talking about one of the best Metroidvanias in recent memory. Instead, it's a game that takes 10 hours to warm up and then it wraps up just as you're hitting your stride. Let me finish with this though. Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown isn't a bad game. It's a game that buries brilliance under some bad first impressions. There is some Metroidvania magic here. Ubisoft just makes you rub your little magic lamp for it, where eventually all that gaming goodness sprays out. So my advice, if you want it, it's this. Stick with The Lost Crown. Treat the first few hours like your vegetables. Not necessarily good for you, but they're not likely to kill you. Then, when you get to dessert, it makes it even sweeter. And that last chapter of The Lost Crown it's great. Once you get a hang of all the game's mechanics, and all the areas can be explored, the game becomes a joy to play. So apart from the other failings I've mentioned, one final drop of the ball was an issue of branding. This didn't need to be a Prince of Persia game. I get that they were trying to rekindle the original franchise's roots, something akin to the Jordan Mechner's original cinematic platformer. But practically, any visuals could have been slapped over the top of the gameplay. Ubisoft could have created a completely new IP or used one of its other franchises. Assassin's Creed and the Missing Templar, Watch Dogs, the broken USB stick, basically, the possibilities are endless. Slightly off topic though, I quite like to play a Watch Dogs Metroidvania with guns and hacking. Ubisoft, can you get on that for me? So, how does this chapter end? Well, Ubisoft disbanded the development team behind Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown after the game failed to meet its sales expectations, despite receiving positive reviews. The game sold approximately 1.3 million units in its first year, which was below Ubisoft's targets. Consequently, a proposed sequel was rejected, and the team were reassigned to other projects within the company, such as Beyond Good and Evil 2 and a new Rayman title. Even though it's normal for a large company like Ubisoft to move people around internally, for fans of The Lost Crown, it feels like a sequel won't be coming anytime soon, if ever. So what's next for the Prince of Persia series? The only game that's officially in the works is a remake. A remake of the 2008 Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. Announced in 2020 targeting a 2021 release, which if you're paying attention has already been and gone. But at Ubisoft Forward in 2024, they've now confirmed a new window of 2026, with development now being handled by the original developer, Ubisoft Montreal. There's a chance that it could end up being on this channel in the year 2048, so subscribe if you're interested in seeing that. And there we have it, my deepish dive into the Prince of Persia The Lost Crown. Thanks again for watching to the end, or at least skipping to the end of the video. Keep an eye out for my next video where I'll be reviewing another game that was released about 1.5 years ago that nobody gives a shit about. Good night. Oh, I'm glad that's done. Cheers, Sargon, for voicing those chapter titles.
That's quite alright, GD. Now you mentioned there might be some sort of monetary payment.
Yeah, about that.